in today's dollars as kind of my conservative estimate for the Bitcoin's full potential valuation. And Michael Saylor read that piece, DM'd me some very kind words about it, and then a few months later, this was in 2023. A few months later, he started using it in his presentations, and it's been a fixture of all of his presentations ever since. In large part because it not only tees up just how small Bitcoin is in the global asset landscape. Bitcoin's only 0.2% of global asset value at this point in time. And that's very helpful to see, like, even though it feels like Bitcoin's expensive because it's over $100,000 per coin, it's actually still tiny relative to everything else. But then it also, for Saylor's purposes and the purposes of all other Bitcoin treasury companies now, it's very helpful as a map to show here's where all the pools of capital are in the world in TradFi. You're getting TradFi returns in the fiat regime, and Saylor kind of uses that as a map for here are the markets I'm going to go target with a new preferred equity instrument that's that goes, for example, goes to the fixed income market and offers them 10% a year when they're accustomed to getting 4% a year. So it's a helpful map for where is there value in the world that we can unlock and entice into a Bitcoin powered product that we can use those proceeds to go buy Bitcoin with and increase our Bitcoin treasury. So it's been a very helpful chart for Saylor and I think also the broader Bitcoin community. It's also funny too to see my numbers show up all over the place now, and almost never cited. But I know that those numbers are my estimates based on my math, and then I see them pop up like in macro stuff because they probably got them from Saylor, and not knowing that they originally come from me. But yeah, it's just funny how that chart has taken on a life of its own because there just wasn't any good view. There wasn't any good estimate out there to help provide some sort of grounding or bearings for here's the world of value.
Are there actually, I've never looked, are there actually any competing models that like come to different kind of numbers?
No, there are some, I guess, some people have made like bar charts that have slightly different numbers, but exactly the same buckets that I have. And, it's pretty clear that their starting point was my work. And then they changed a few things just to make it so that they didn't have to cite me. I think that's pretty common. I've seen a handful of those, but in terms of like, in consulting, we called it MiCA, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive analysis, where they would show the whole world of value. I haven't seen anything that does it in a different approach that's not like based on my approach to it.
Interesting. Yeah, they say it reminded me of school when you like copy, but you kind of have to be careful to copy not exactly so,
right.
to make it.
There's a lot of that going on, unfortunately.
I can imagine because this chart has like outgrown a lot already.
Yeah.
I have an interesting one.
But people can just use my chart. I have it in white background and dark theme background, and please, everybody has my blessing to use it, so long as there's that little citation at the bottom. That'd be great.
Yeah, people are, how should I say it? It's almost a greedy thing of I don't want to share a stage with someone. Like you don't want to give someone like the compliment of like, oh, you did it. Like, so like, I don't know if it's a greedy thing or like, but I see it a lot on Twitter, where like, I was like this and that.
Yeah, there's definitely that, sort of people who have carved out a reputation or self-branded as like a thought leader. And then, they tend to be the ones who create their own very, very similar version of this chart. It has also been funny to see in the Bitcoin treasury company landscape. I can think of a few Bitcoin treasury companies that, I guess are peers to the one I work for, or you could call them competitors, that have like the same analysis, have done their own versions of my global asset landscape numbers, but they certainly can't, cite me because I'm competition in their eyes.
It's being copied, in my opinion, is still like the biggest compliment someone can give you, even though it would always be fine to like be at least cited. And I mean, I understand it with like memes, because some people are like, oh, like this meme is from me, and I'm like, I have like no clue. Like how would I know that like from who this meme is? Because you have like someone's like claims it's his, and then like that's not even there. But with something like that, it's so obvious, like from where it is. Like I think it's like very well known that those numbers come from you. It's like, yeah, like just cite it, like just give some credit.
I appreciate that. And it's sort of, in some ways, maybe it's emerging as like a, if you know kind of thing, right? Where like most people think those numbers are Saylor's because, he puts it on his chart and there's a little tiny citation at the bottom. You know, he's doing exactly, what I would hope, but most people don't, read the fine print to, and they assume it's Saylor's, and that's fine. But I guess it's kind of a, if you know where it actually comes from, and you've got a little bit of a intellectual, deep cut knowledge, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think it was in Prague. This is, I think, the first time I was in Prague, and he was also there. And I didn't even have my podcast back then. I just like started a small Twitter channel, and he was telling about the chart, and it's literally how I came up to you actually, because he said like, I think he's like, there's this guy called Croesus, like he mentioned you by name when he pulled up the chart in Prague, I think, and then I was searching. I think this was the first. I could be confused, but I think it was the first time in Prague where he pulled it up.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that was his first presentation in years, that that he had been presenting on stage, and so that was the first time that he had presented that slide, and he mentioned, a Bitcoin analyst Croesus, but since then he's you're just not going to say that every time. So it's kind of cool actually to hear that, like, that's how you heard about me, was because Saylor cited that slide on stage, and that's great. I appreciate it. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was maybe I have to also say, like, I'm still am, to a certain extent, a huge Saylor fanboy at that time, and I was like, oh wait, Saylor takes it from him, like I should see who's
Yeah,
this
I love
guy.
that. Yeah, he's got like 4.5 million followers. I have 1/50th of that.
But yeah, I had a whole different question, but because I feel like sometimes those, and it might be very different with Bitcoin, because those innovative things sometimes have. When you look at Amazon or Uber or like companies that originally get like those sizable markets, they look at like Amazon and they're like, oh yeah, they're selling books. Like, okay, like what's the market for that? They did not anticipate that they do AWS, that they sell also vacuum cleaners, and like they have their own branding things, like whatever Amazon is now doing. Also, even with Uber, they kind of expanded the market, because all of a sudden people took a Uber that wouldn't have taken a taxi. So like I, for example, never took a taxi. When Uber came along, I was like, oh, like that I like with the app and everything. Like it got me from like sometimes instead of taking public transport, actually like just taking an Uber. And my point is, like, some of those innovations actually have an expanding market kind of a thing. With your thing, that's why I like it so much, is like you see all of it, and then it's just a debate of like, how much possibly can Bitcoin capture? And I saw from 5% to like 95%, probably all of the estimations. But I'm curious on how you think about this, and also how Bitcoin in potentially in the future could even like expand further, especially as it's programmable, and as it's like you can do things with Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's a really cool topic. I think that's part of what Saylor really liked about that analysis was, it's kind of hard to remember just a few years ago, like there wasn't any like, concrete perspective of like, here's exactly what Bitcoin is, in terms of, what use case it's providing. I feel like 2018 with bullish case for Bitcoin and then the Bitcoin standard coming out, it really helped ground Bitcoin as like a store of value. And that's the real, importance of it is as a store of value. And I was, of course, heavily influenced by that, and that brought me to Bitcoin. But it was still kicking around in my head of like, what's in scope then? Like how much? What does it really mean to be a store of value? And what are you competing against? And so that bit of analysis kind of wrestled with those thoughts of like, okay, what is Bitcoin trying to do? And it starts with the sort of implicit assumption there that like Bitcoin's role will continue to expand until it reaches its maximum extent. And then the question is like, what is that, right? So the whole first half of that piece is really kind of teeing up that, what is Bitcoin competing for? What is its purpose? What does it do? And, it's the best savings technology ever. It's the best store of value ever. It's got the best properties. When you compare when you line up the properties of Bitcoin as a store of value asset, and then you compare those to the same sort of properties for every other bucket on that global asset landscape chart, Bitcoin's by far the best. Most of all because of its finite supply, and increasing scarcity terminating in absolute scarcity is unmatched, and that's only possible because it's digital, and that's right there you have the crux for why Bitcoin is superior to all the analog assets. It's digital in nature, and that comes with all these advantages, and makes it the ceiling on what it could be is infinitely higher because it was designed with finite supply in mind. And yeah, so it's sort of that piece starts with like, okay, let's assume the maximum extent of what Bitcoin can become, and that's a different sort of bit of analysis than what with Amazon, or for classic examples like Nike, where they start in a market and then there's a whole bunch of other adjacent markets that they can expand into, and then they basically the scope of what's in scope keeps growing for companies like that turn into sort of conglomerates of products. But Bitcoin is different, right? It's like you have to start with the maximum scope in order to understand like the end state at the highest level, right? Like store of value as a use case is so much more abstract and high level than what people typically think about. People are so accustomed to thinking about products and industries and and that level of granularity. But you have to up level your thinking to like, where do people park value? and I think that's kind of like part of what had been missing is nobody had really sized the market for this abstract concept of like parking value in assets, at least that I had seen. And yeah, and then I think that simplifies it, right? Like if you ignore the fact that Bitcoin will expand in terms of how many people it touches and how many things are built on top of it, but forget about what L2s and L3s and other functionality will end up becoming in scope, and instead focus on just store of value, which is I think 95% plus of the value for Bitcoin. Then you're starting with the maximum view, and then you can establish roughly what you think is the ceiling in terms of that that scope is everything. And I think that's what people had been missing, is that for Bitcoin absolutely every bit of value in the world is in scope, and I think nobody had really said that, or at least that I had seen.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we have, I think Seiferdin said it, where he mentioned the store of value use case of Bitcoin is almost all of it value, where we have maybe 400, 500 trillion, whatever the number is of what store of value totally is, and then is the medium of exchange part of it, it's a small part. Like it adds a little bit on top, which is a big market at its alone, but compared to the store of value in the Bitcoin market, is like it's nothing almost.
Exactly. Yeah, like it must come from Seyfried, my thinking on that. But it's people get so caught up in medium of exchange, and and the function of money is to transact in, when it's absolutely not. And I think looking at Austrian economics is really helpful for that, which I was totally missing before Bitcoin. I didn't have any Austrian econ background. But they're absolutely right that the real function of money is to store value and propagate it into the future for future use. That's what everybody is doing with the vast majority of their net worth every single day. And you just don't think about it. So you only think about money as, those bills that you hand over in a transaction, but everybody has monetized every asset in the world because they're using it as a store of value. So that's monetization of equities, of real estate. Everything is used as a savings instrument to propagate value into the future. And you don't think about it every day, but that's what you're doing with most of your money, is you've parked it in a store of value asset. So any given day, what percentage of your net worth are you actually transacting in? Some tiny percentage, and that's the appropriate balance to think about the relative importance of store of value as a use case versus medium of exchange.
Yeah, and I I also think Bitcoin already is anyways a medium of exchange. Like it is like it is a great store of value, and there's this like, oh, but we need to push it as a medium of exchange, and I'm like, it will come naturally. And it is already here. I already get paid in Bitcoin, most of it actually, and I already pay a little bit in Bitcoin. I mean, I don't know, 10-20% of my expenses directly already. So I'm like, it anyways already achieved that. Like it is already possible to have Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. So yeah, like I don't get that debate.
It's kind of funny in hindsight thinking about, like the big blocker argument of like, well, you can't buy a coffee with on-chain settlement. It's like, okay, all right, fine. Carve out your tiny little use case of like small transactions that need to settle immediately rather than within 10 minutes, and you can't afford let's call it $1 transaction fee. Like how many transactions are there like that? Well, most of your purchases day to day, but that's still, a subset of all the money that you're dealing in, and that's a subset of all of your net worth that the vast majority of it you've parked in store of value assets and it stays there. So like the big blockers were through they got put the cart before the horse, right? And they prioritize something that is so secondary in hindsight. It doesn't matter at all compared to the importance of immutable store of value asset.
Yeah, it's decentralization and security that matters, and then like buying a coffee comes second to that. It's very, very obvious for me.
Yeah, knowing that my net worth is safe is kind of infinitely more important than my ability to buy a coffee.
Very true. I want to dive into, because you gave kind of like a 2025 update to this chart, and I want to pull it up again. And it's interesting because you said global assets. So the 2023 chart was, I think, 900 trillion.
Yep. And that's the number you see all over the place in Twitter and other macro econ now. That 900 trillion number is all over the place and is never cited too.
Yeah, and soon it will be 1,000 trillion.
Right.
But yeah, like the 900 trillion is like, you will be probably seeing it still along. I probably like till like middle of 2026, because people use just like the one chart they found at the Seyler presentation.
And it's more memorable too. Like the 900 trillion number is actually it's like a better number from a marketing perspective than 1,000 trillion than 1 quadrillion. So anyway, I think that'll be like surprisingly sticky.
Yeah,
even
I
though
was
it's now outdated.
outdated, so already 2 years. Yeah, especially with those numbers, they get outdated quickly. I heard in the when I read through it that you think about doing like a monthly or quarterly like update to that.
Yeah, I was actually thinking I plan on doing a related bit of analysis, and I need to update that chart now, mostly because gold has been ripping this year, up 43% this year, and so those numbers are probably already outdated. It's probably north of 25 trillion for gold already, which is crazy because that means that gold has increased in value by more than Bitcoin's entire value this year. Actually in the last 3 months, let's say, gold has gone up more than Bitcoin's entire value,
That's
which I think is
crazy.
just another testament to just how early it is for Bitcoin.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.